This forex pair just saw a huge move. First off, read this disclaimer carefully. We are going to look at this pair right here, the US dollar / South African Rand. We have the weekly data points in front of us, and we can go way back. You can see that the US dollar, it strengthened during the earlier phase of the dot-com bubble, but then the US dollar weakened dramatically. As far as the housing bubble, the US dollar, it peaked actually here in October 2008, then it weakened against the South African Rand. So there is a trend here. There's a trend of the US dollar strengthening, heading in to a bear market, but then weaken. Interestingly, you could make a strong case that we currently have, you know, a bear market, a recession, potentially even a global depression. Well, US dollar is doing its thing. It is strengthening, heading into the early phases of the bear market. Given the history with that we saw here, and here, pretty darn similar. Of course, it could very well be that the conditions here are drastically different from what we had in the past. Then again, there is a pattern, meaning even though the US dollar recently had a huge move, if we measure from here to here, 38-ish% strengthening, huge move, there is good reason to think we will see it weaken if what we are currently facing is another bear market, a global bear market. US dollar strengthens into the early phases, then it weakens against the South African Rand. Having said that, South Africa, it is a very unstable country. There is increasing racial tensions. That's likely going to spike. Hence, that of course would be bearish for the South African Rand. If you look at some technical indicators, the US dollar, it is way overbought. I mean, this is just an extreme move. There is a 31% positive correlation between this currency pair and the S&P 500. The average true range here shows that we had a really sharp spike in volatility. Looking at the daily data points, you can see that, we have been in overbought territory for quite some time. We are above all the moving averages and they are all positive. But you could certainly make the case that this is way too excessive. If you look at the history, this is just a very abnormal move. The trend for this pair is that it's much more even. Tug and pull between the bulls and the bears. This is just lopsided in favor of the bulls. Very interesting movements here and levels to watch, and some very critical lessons from the past. You could, as far as the potential bullish setup here, to take that side as well. If we do get a rally above this level here, then we would neutralize the double topping pattern. Because there is a double topping pattern in development here, top here, and if we see some deterioration we would have a double top. But if we get above this level, then it would be a breakout. But then again, this move is very excessive, hence I think that the probability is in favor of the bears, if there is some semblance of rationality in this pair. Let's compare USA with South Africa. We know a lot about USA. Britain's American colonies broke with the mother country in 1776. South Africa, the fossil record indicates humans have inhabited South Africa since prehistoric times. And during the modern era, the region was settled by the Khoisan and Bantu peoples. Dutch traders landed at the southern tip of present-day South Africa in 1652. First multiracial elections in 1994 following the end of apartheid ushered in majority rule under an ANC-led government. Here we got a bunch of geographic data. Let's maybe scroll down a bit. Here are some demographics. You can see that there are 55 million people in South Africa. Substantially less than the USA, but that was expected. Let's look at the age structure. Here you can see a huge difference. So as far as 65 years and over, around 6% in South Africa, but 16% in USA. Huge difference. The biggest group is between 25 and 54. That's in both countries. Yeah, but you can see that there's a lot of young people here in South Africa, between 0 and 14 years. 28% is versus 19-ish for USA. Population growth rate is rather similar. A life expectancy, huge difference. 80 years for USA, 64 years for South Africa. Let's go a bit further down here. Religion, Christianity. Education expenditures. 5% of GDP in USA, 6.1 in South Africa. Let's scroll down to get some economics. Okay, here. We know a lot about USA, so let's rather focus a bit on South Africa. South Africa is a middle-income emerging market with an abundant supply of natural resources. Well-developed financial, legal, communications, energy and transport sectors, and the stock exchange that is Africa's largest and among the top 20 in the world. Economic growth has decelerated in recent years, slowing to an estimated 0.7% in 2017. Unemployment, poverty and inequality, among the highest in the world, remains a challenge. Official unemployment is roughly 27% of the workforce and runs significantly higher among black youth, and that's really high. And this would increase substantially now with the contagion and the global slowdown, which in turn could lead to social tensions. Even though the country's modern infrastructure supports a relatively efficient distribution of goods to major urban centers throughout the region, unstable electricity supplies retard growth. Eskom, the state-run power company, is building 3 new power stations and is installing new power demand management programs to improve power grid reliability, but has been plagued with accusations of mismanagement and corruption and faces an increasingly high debt burden. Yeah, this is very critical infrastructure with some severe vulnerability. South Africa's economic policy has focused on controlling inflation while empowering a broader economic base. However, the country faces structural constraints that also limit economic growth, such as skills shortages, declining global competitiveness, and frequent work stoppages due to strike action. The government faces growing pressure from urban constituencies to improve the delivery of basic services to low-income areas, to increase job growth, and to provide university-level education at affordable prices. Well, the key as far as university education, it should have utility value, because this is just a mess in the West. Political infighting among South Africa's ruling party and the volatility of the rand risks economic growth. As we saw in the charts, this is very volatile. And this strengthening of the US dollar means that the South African rand weakened proportionately. International investors are concerned about the country's long-term economic stability. In late 2016, most major international credit ratings agencies downgraded South Africa's international debt to junk bond status. Yeah, that's not good. Our import partners. Germany is actually rather big here, 12%, but just 5% for USA. Interesting. So this is a great website for comparing countries. Tons of data from CIA. Very interesting pair. The most interesting things is when we look at the previous bear markets. There was a very consistent trend of the US dollar strengthening into the early part of the bear markets, but later on it would weaken. That is really interesting. And if you go here back, to the financial crisis. So let's look at the weekly data points, like that. Here we have, let's zoom in, financial crisis. The US dollar peaks here October 2008. But the stock market, it reached a low in March 2009. Interestingly, this is when the US dollar weakened. Of course, that could be, caused by multiple factors, but it is a very consistent trend. Euphoric. Now let's keep this one on our radar. Whatever you do, of course, you always let the trend be your friend.